I'm Maryn.
And I'm Christie.
And you're listening to Hung,
a podcast where we talk about true crime from the court of law to the court of public opinion. Welcome back. We are continuing with our series on Colin Griffith.
Yes, and today we get to talk about the court of public opinion. Finally,
Yay!
I finally put my ideas together enough.
That's right. I can stop talking and Maryn can start talking. You guys, I'm sure, are very relieved.
I'm not. Just kidding. It's really interesting for me to hear the trial perspective, but it's exciting for me to be like, okay, we can actually talk about it now.
Right. So, I mean, I couldn't help but see the titling of the case, the way that the media was saying.
I feel like they're all like, killer, teen, blah, blah, blah.
Yes, right. Exactly.
I do think that the general consensus, people believe that he's guilty, though the jury did say he was not guilty. There are some people who said, you know what, I think the jury got it right on this one. And I'm conflicted.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, a little bit of background. We've talked about the early unfortunate upbringing of Colin's family and Colin's life. So you were correct. Kathy was, I think, 13 when she got pregnant, and the father was 19, I believe, or maybe even 21. So pretty big age difference there.
So even if you want to call that a boyfriend, you can't consent at 13 to a 20-year-old.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't know that has that much bearing as far as like the case is involved, because I think the important parts of that were discussed in court, and as far as like the environment that the family was in before they got divorced, that kind of very violent environment.
So did they talk at all about the dad? Like, was he also violent? Because I do find it interesting that when they get divorced, that he's the one that has custody, because usually the mother gains custody.
Well, what happened is,
what's the deal?
What happened is, when she got pregnant, it wasn't Colin that she had. It was an older son, Christopher. So, and then I think it's 4 years later that she gets pregnant with Collin. She kept Christopher and he took Collin, I believe is what happened.
Okay.
And I don't know, maybe Collin wanted to go with his dad. I don't know what the thought was there.
I mean, they did bring up that the kids were taken away from them, like taken away out of the home as a result of some of this domestic violence, whether it's from whatever side, I don't know. But yeah, like you said, maybe it was a choice. You take one, I'll take the other. But it's also, this is not a judgment on Kathy, or it's not meant to be at all, but it's just a comparison of what's normal. The normal thing that I would expect to see, and what it seems to be the most typical, which I could be wrong, I don't know statistics, but that if you were going to split up the kids, mom would usually keep the younger child. But
well, and I think they were living in Oklahoma and moved to Florida near her mom, and maybe he didn't want to go because he was already in school there, and
that's fair. Obviously, there are plenty of reasons that have nothing to do with the fitness of Kathy, or whether the courts made that decision for her, or if they made that decision.
That information may be out there. I'm not sure. I haven't looked for that specifically. I just didn't even think about that, really.
Yeah.
I'm just like, well, that's the fact. He went with his dad and she went to Florida, And obviously you heard a little bit that something had happened in Oklahoma.
Yes.
But that he wasn't charged for anything.
And that was in 2023.
Yes. So February 14th, 2023, Collin was 15 at the time, and he allegedly shot his father at the family home in Lincoln County, Oklahoma. The father reportedly had a knife, and the shooting was claimed as a self-defense. So his story is that his father was chasing him around with a knife. The house has multiple guns in it. He just happened to grab a gun that was already loaded and shot him in self-defense.
That's hard, because hearing that, it's like, okay, well, you have some similarities. There's the knife, and he's attacking me with a knife.
The fact that it's a parent, the fact that you've killed both of your parents now, but both were self-defense.
Yeah.
But it's also like the reports of how the family environment was. It's like, well, I don't know, maybe you just really felt that you were in danger both of those times.
Yeah.
At the very least, makes you think of like, well, it's what kind of environment were you in that made you overreact in
Sure.
that way? Like, you can defend yourself, but to defend yourself that far were they really trying to kill you when that happened?
Right.
Or
Well, and then, I mean, that does bring up the idea of if this was the first act of violence by the dad, then it wouldn't make sense. I mean, I guess if you're like, well, he just went crazy and he started chasing me with a knife. Well, if so, I mean, that's like my worst nightmare is being chased. Add in being chased with a knife. And I mean, it couldn't be much worse for me. Is just horrific. So maybe the one event, maybe that really would be enough, but that seems like a
he was
pretty
shot
major escalation.
once in the chest and once in the head. More than one shot is also a
Right.
lot. I don't know. That's why I'm like, maybe there's a world where those things did happen to the same person.
Yeah.
Maybe there is a world where that happens, but it's also a world that potentially your mom has a really freak accident that's never happened before where she falls on top of a knife on her neck. Like, I don't know.
Well, and I think it is like, okay, well, that doesn't even have to be true to still
If
be
it was
justified,
self-defense,
right? It doesn't have to be true. But it's also, there are some weird things about the injury itself that don't add up to me. I mean, weird if it's a fall, but also doesn't seem like the normal kind of stab type of thing either. And when I was thinking about, there was something about just like the injury between her thumb and forefinger that just, I kept like, something is wrong with this picture. And when I was thinking about it at 2 a.m. this morning, because I knew we were going to record, I was thinking, okay, what is it? Because we talked about like, if someone is stabbing at you and you hold up your hand as a defensive measure, right? That blade could slice across that area. But if it was at the moment of actual injury, like let's say when she actually was stabbed, it doesn't fit because the dull side of the blade would have been towards her hand. So if she held up her hand and she was trying to defend herself from a knife strike, if that knife had hit her hand right there, it wouldn't have cut her because that would have been the blunt side of the knife that was running along between her thumb and forefinger because the sharp point was pointed towards the middle of her neck. So it doesn't really fit with that. And I also am thinking about Colin being right-handed. Let's say they're on the ground and he's stabbing down into her neck. Well, if you're right-handed, what hand are you going to use to stab someone? Well, he would have had to be using his left hand to stab her because it's on the right side of her neck. So, and it went from front to back.
Is it possible that he... Well, because they said it happened when she was laying on the ground, or they think it did.
Well, we don't know.
Because could he have been behind her?
And stab towards himself? Like, that would also be...
I mean, you kind of would if you're thinking of going across.
Well, if you're slicing, yes, you would stand behind. And that would make way more sense if he was trying to kill her and he sliced across her neck. But this is a direct stab straight through from front to back with the knife perfectly parallel to the floor if she was standing, right? I'm like, she would be fighting. It would not be this clean, thing through.
Yeah.
So it does make me think that it happened really fast.
Right.
So this idea of what Colin's grandpa said, he said he wanted to do, I want to watch the knife go through, I
want to feel her blood.
Yeah, it was like, well, it definitely wasn't like, I'm going to sit and I'm going to push this in really slow. She would not have stayed still for that.
No.
So, I mean... doesn't seem like she would, right? And we heard from the ME, like, people grab at it. Nothing fits with that scenario.
Yeah.
And I can't make sense of it. And I realize that it is possible and maybe even probable that he did kill his mom. And I don't feel like there's enough evidence to overcome all reasonable
Yes.
doubt. I don't think there is. And so that's
Like,
why
does
the
it
verdict.
does it maybe make the most sense? Yes, but you have to have the proof behind it. the evidence
Exactly.
behind it, which I totally
Right.
understand.
Right. It's not the
yeah.
truth of the matter because you can't know, but
Right.
you can only know what can be proven. And if it can't be proven, then you can't find someone guilty. Even if you think they really probably are, that's not enough.
Yeah. Well, some more information about the killing in Oklahoma. So he made the 911 call
Again.
again, saying that he shot his father because he was chasing him with a knife. Then they did originally arrest him, and he was held on, I think, bond. The bond was $50,000, I believe, and it was paid. I can't remember by who, probably his grandma. But in the end, they determined that they couldn't rule out self-defense, so they decided not to pursue it.
It makes me wonder if these events will change their
Because
decision.
he hasn't been charged with anything yet. He hasn't been.
There's no trial.
There's no trial.
Yeah,
so
he wasn't acquitted. They decided they
didn't
not
press
to
any-
pursue it,
Right.
basically. But I think that is, I know I bring up the Lori Vallow Daybell trial a lot because that was the whole impetus for doing this podcast in the first place, is just all this craziness that happened to all these different people. But I think it was when they saw the other crimes that occurred after Charles's death and after the attempted murder of Brandon Boudreaux that they like, wait a minute, we need to, I mean, I think they were looking at Charles Vallow as a potential planned murder. But I think the fact that these other murders occurred then strengthened their
Totally.
resolve to like, okay, there's something bigger here going on. And so I do wonder if seeing the situation with his mom in Florida may lead them to continue to investigate and to end up bringing charges.
100%. Well, and what's so interesting is, again, they were the only ones there. I guess his dad's girlfriend had been in the house, but she left to go run some errands, and then this occurred. And then also I would be curious to see if it does go to court later on, if they allow the killing of his mother to be
Guaranteed they won't.
because he was acquitted of
Yeah.
that. So even more so than like, well, this happened, but he wasn't charged. He
True.
was charged and acquitted. So it's like, hey, he's not guilty, so we can't talk about it. Again, is he...
And also because it happened after. That's the other thing, is that's part of the reason certain things couldn't come into Charles Vallow's trial is because they happened after. So
Right.
you can't bring them in.
Totally.
It's
No,
after
that makes sense.
the fact, and that the same with his mom.
So, also in regards to just kind of things that Colin has said about his dad and his relationship with his dad, I guess Colin came out as gay and his father wasn't supportive of that. And that maybe after that point, he says that his father pulled him out of school and that he was being held in the house. But I can't find that anywhere. And I understand that that's because he's a minor and schools can't just like give information about that. But I also feel like if that were not, well, either way, if that was true, it would be easily proved by police to be able to investigate. And they obviously would have the clearance to get that. I'm like, that's a pretty big thing if it did happen or didn't happen, right?
So I think that it's an established fact based on the trial that he was 3 years behind in school. And why? Like, because so that makes sense that he's like, he pulled me out of school. I wasn't able,
For 3 years out of school?
3 years. Yeah. And that is the time that he was with his dad was 3 years because he had to make up all of those years of school, and he was doing concurrent enrollment in college, and he graduated a year early from high school. So
I mean, that's a lot to do in a short amount of time,
Yeah.
though. 4 years of school early and...
Yeah. Like when you think about, okay, he has this crazy home life, violence between his parents at the bare minimum, right? Nothing really came up about violence towards the children themselves when they were growing up, so I don't really know about that. And then you're also pulled out of school, so you're not being socialized. I mean, that was the big fear when I did homeschool you guys for a couple years, was that people were like, oh, they're going to be weird and they're not going to be socialized, you know.
Well, it's also a common red flag for abuse. If your child is in school, especially if you're already suspicious of some things and then they get pulled out of school, like that can be a red flag, because now they're stuck in that house. Anything could be happening and nobody would know.
That's true. You know? And I don't know, I mean, every state has its own laws, but I know where we homeschooled in Florida that we had to keep records of the schooling that we were doing. And when we went to put you back in school that following year, they had someone come out and do an assessment at our house with you guys and your progress and what you'd done and what you'd been studying and things like that. So I mean, for 3 years, you're not in school at all.
I mean, high school, they don't probably feel as...
I know they have truancy rules, like laws that you can arrest parents, like you can hold them. I mean, I don't know anything about Oklahoma, so maybe it's more common that kids are homeschooled. Maybe they don't have the same type of regulations around it. But here's a home that CPS has been involved in.
Right.
And for him to not be enrolled in school for 3 years, like you said, that would be a big red flag. It's like, what's happening out here?
Yeah. After this happened, he goes to live with his mom in Florida. So, you know, when she's talking about, like, oh, I've got on Ring camera that you planned and intentionally killed your dad, you know. And also makes sense why they might ask if Susan's husband was afraid of Colin and, like, well, he killed his dad. I don't know. Like, I don't know if I want him to come live here and maybe kill you or me, even if he wasn't charged with anything. Now, she said that that wasn't the case. She said, no, that's not why he didn't want him to live there.
Right.
But you can see that that's where they were leading that questioning.
And obviously they wanted the jury to be aware that he was involved in a shooting death the year prior. I mean, I think it would go further to establishing a pattern of behavior, knowing who it was, that it was the dad, and that may have influenced especially the details around it. I don't know. I think that might have made it harder for me. I don't know what my verdict would have been with that.
Yeah. I don't know. I feel conflicted about it. It just seems too convenient.
Yeah.
That it happened with both parents. Yeah, so fast forward to 2 months later, when our episode finally released.
I've really been able to process.
Yeah, well, it was mostly listening to our episodes leading up to this one that really made me think about it. And I was just thinking about all of the evidence that was used to support that Kathy may have been a violent person, and so it might be plausible that she could have initiated some sort of violence that he may have then acted in self-defense. All of the domestic violence incidents, pinning her ex-husband against the wall with her car, and stabbing so-and-so, they don't feel irrelevant, but at the same time, they decide that none of Colin's violent past can be admitted into the trial, which makes sense. Also, I think that's a pretty normal standard, but it also feels weird that then we can use her past as a way to say, look at her past, she probably did this, and we can't look at Colin's past and also say he might have done it because, look, he actually already killed one of his parents in quote-unquote self-defense.
Yeah, it does seem like a double standard. The idea that stuff about Kathy and about the possibility of her acting in a violent manner, that is relevant, but that the same is not true for Colin.
Right.
And that feels like, why, if one, why not the other?
Right. It feels then prejudicial against Kathy in a way that's like, if you hadn't known all of those things about Kathy, would you still have come to the conclusion that you came to? In some ways, maybe yes, because there wasn't really enough evidence. But in a lot of ways, there was kind of a feeling of like, well, I don't know. She was kind of crazy. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do know what you mean. Yeah, it's hard to know, but I do think it's the fact that with his experience with Kathy, even if it's not true that it's a threat Could he reasonably have perceived it as a threat?
Sure.
And based on all of those other things in his past interactions with Kathy, then the answer to that is yes, he could have seen it as a threat, and therefore we side with not guilty. But I think that was something that made it easier to make that decision.
Right. I mean, you could also fairly say, well, Colin's mom knows that he killed his dad. Could she also be worried for herself and her own life? And
Yeah,
act
but
in
why
response
is
to that?
why is she racing over there in her car and confronting him aggressively if she knows that he could be violent and he could kill me? Why didn't she follow the advice of the juvenile detective, of
Yeah,
her mom,
100%.
and say, calm down, let's let things calm down?
Yeah.
And I mean, this does, like, me saying that does sound like blaming the victim, which I don't feel that. But that's another layer to show that if she did know that about Collin, which we know she did, that
Right.
why isn't she taking advice and giving time to cool off, or letting him get help at a mental health facility
Sure.
or something?
Yeah.
And that doesn't make sense either.
Definitely. But you can see how something may have started small and that both people could have reacted more than you would expect would be a normal reaction, because
Yes.
both have experience with the other of either hurting somebody else or hurting them. I think both things probably should have been allowed in court if all of those past instances of hers was allowed. Because if you're like, this is a separate crime, and just because he did that in the past doesn't mean he's doing it now, also means that just because she did something violent in the past doesn't mean that she was threatening or doing something violent now. So if it's all about the isolated incident, then it should have been all about the isolated incident and not about either of their pasts, or bring up both of their pasts and let you decide with that.
I mean, that's true, because besides the detective coming up and talking about the Oklahoma incident that he was arrested but not charged, the only other time we hear about a record is when the domestic violence call and the officer runs their backgrounds and he says, yeah, Collin didn't have any record of any arrests or anything. So you have both of them side by side, and there's Collin, who has zero record at that point, and you have Kathy, who has this long record. And so it does seem unbalanced towards Kathy in that way. So I can see that point of why that feels unfair. I do think that it's unfortunate that there is this shadow kind of cast on Kathy that I think might be ultimately unfair to her, that she's a more complete person than that, obviously. And in this case, it was easy to focus in on just the negative things that may have contributed to Colin's experience or his beliefs in this case. I mean, the state really did try to focus on all this good stuff that she did and wanted. And yeah, I feel bad that more of her mental health issues ended up being at the forefront.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, they kind of have to talk about that, right? Like, it's not her celebration of life, it is like a trial, right? But
True.
you know, and they can only say it because it's true. But it does feel like there's enough connection to me with the person that Collin killed in self-defense, self-proclaimed self-defense, was his other parent. That feels like there's enough of a connection there that it should have been allowed.
Yeah, and especially because it did happen prior to this incident, and that definitely would have changed how things looked. Maybe instead of the I did it before, I can do it again, it's a I got away with it before, I can get away with it again. You know, is that
Which
the
she
thinking?
did, if that's what happened. Like,
right. Yeah. So, you know, there is that question of, did he make it a situation that he recognized that people wouldn't be able to be sure what happened?
I think that including that past instance with Collin and his dad, do I think that even with that being entered and considered, that necessarily means that he should be given a guilty sentence. Maybe not, but I do think it's not irrelevant or prejudicial necessarily.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's like, does this just paint a fuller picture of the reality instead of a skewed version of reality?
Right. Yeah, it's like adds further context that I think is worth knowing. I mean, they gave you enough of like, yeah, he was involved in something. He was involved in a killing that was self-defense and nothing ever came of that.
Yeah. I mean, like we talked about, obviously the fact that it was a shooting and it was once in the chest and once in the head, that does seem very strange. And we have another incident with circumstances that seem very strange. So
yeah, I mean, I guess you can't really imagine it unless you're in that situation, but I guess like, well, if it's truly self-defense, then I would probably shoot and run away somewhere, right? Like, I'm not necessarily like, let me shoot you in the head too, or maybe I'll stab you somewhere not deadly.
yeah, I mean, there really never was a self-defense claim in that way. Like,
Sure.
I stabbed her to protect myself. It was a,
Well, kind
you know,
of.
fighting over the knife or fighting with each other,
Right.
and the end result being a stabbing, but not necessarily like that's how I was trying to protect myself, is by
Sure.
stabbing her in the neck, you know.
Yeah. But they do definitely try to claim at least that she was wielding a knife against him, and that's kind of how things happened, because there's the slash across his stomach, that she was the person instigating or initiating the violence, and he is reacting.
Right. At least the introduction of the knife does seem like it was more likely her, based on the information that we have with the slash and the corresponding injury on his stomach. That does seem that that was the first introduction of the knife
Right.
to the scene. With the bruising and things like that, there could have been some physical fighting between the two of them, because we know it got physical in the past between them. So there could have been physical fighting happening, and she could have grabbed the knife to defend herself.
Right.
So just because it looks like she may have been the person with the knife first doesn't mean that she was trying to incite violence. She could have been pulling a knife to get him back away from her, to,
And she has
you know,
bruises that we
Yeah.
to talk about as well. So
yeah, so that's definitely a possibility, that she was trying to defend herself and then they're struggling over the knife and somehow she ends up being stabbed. How exactly that
Right.
happened, I don't know.
I don't
Yeah.
know. But one of the major things that was discussed outside of the presence of jury was whether or not they could put into evidence text messages from Colin to his attorney, a different attorney, like not
Yeah,
for
this was the one that I said, Jeffrey Rabkin, that they brought up, that they had this business card of his and they introduced this, and then
nothing happened.
yeah, and I was like,
Yeah.
wait a minute, where's Jeffrey Rabkin? And
So, and how they had gotten it was that at some point, Kathy had been going through his phone, saw this text message, took a picture of it, and then she also texted that image to Susan. And what it was him saying that he wanted to stab his mom in the neck. But the issue with why that they were trying to discuss whether it could be entered into evidence or not was because it was a text message to his lawyer, which could be covered under client lawyer
Privilege, right.
privileges. But it was this whole discussion of the state was bringing up cases where they ruled in favor of like he's a minor and like a child's right to the privacy of their phone is not greater than the parent's right to access to their phone and for their protection and to parent them.
Yeah.
And also cases where like I guess the law enforcement wanted to do a search of like a child's room and the parent was able to give consent for that even
Right.
if the child didn't want it. But
Yeah.
then the defense went forth and said basically like, yeah, but this isn't the same thing. This is supposed to be used basically like for the well-being of the child in parenting, and just because it came about in this way doesn't mean that it can be put into court, because it's still a message that was sent under the assumption of client privilege, or and
Right.
also the fact that they're saying, well, maybe I don't know, that he's a child, so he also doesn't know as much. So it's like to easily be like, oh no, we waive that privilege. I'm like, well, is that a reason to waive that privilege? I don't know. And the judge was like, yep, that's kind of been my thoughts about it as well, like agreeing with the defense attorney. But he's like, but explain to me why this is different from these other cases that he's brought up. And, you know, in the end, they decided not to show them. So,
I mean, that is something that does bolster Robert's testimony of him making that statement. I mean, does seem a little strange that there's not evidence of a lot of communication between them. So, you know, whether he would have made that type of statement to him or not. Well, it's also
like he's been making statements like this, but always to officials, and always, it seems like, could also be viewed as with an attempt to be separated. And so you could say, yeah, he was saying all these things and he meant them. You could also say he was saying all of these things intentionally because he didn't want to do them, and he felt he wanted to be Baker acted, or he wanted to be away from his mom in that environment. So
yeah, I mean, one of the things the defense brought up in their closing argument was with the kidnapping, like him forcing Kathy to stay there against her will. She was like, he would have been thrilled if Kathy would leave. If she would go get in her car and go back home, he would have been happy. Like, that's what he was trying to do, was to separate from her. So the idea of him forcing her to stay is not consistent with any of his other behavior, which I agree
the kidnapping
with.
thing is too much for me, especially the time frame, like an hour and 15 minutes. Like, she was held against her will. There wasn't enough of a strong, like, if it was really like, oh, she was dragged off her feet into the house, like, no, but you heard her say, let go of my hair, and he kind of put his arm around her shoulder and they walked inside, like,
right. Well, and she was wearing shorts and flip-flops. So that's also, like, I imagine, okay, if you're really being dragged, like, you're gonna have scrapes up your calves and stuff. If you were wearing pants, maybe you wouldn't notice it, but if you were really getting dragged, you would have some sort of indication
also, we've
of
talked
being
about
dragged.
No scratches on him, no foreign DNA under her fingernails, which, again, like we said, if she's being dragged by her hair, she's probably holding her hair, not actually trying to scratch him. But again, I mean, there's a lot of time in between there, so
yeah,
I don't know. And there's really no other information. It's also pretty recent, so who knows if anything new will come out. I think, to me, I would probably, maybe not first degree murder, but maybe a lesser, I don't know, but just the fact that
how would you come to that with the evidence that's presented? I think that's,
well, I'm saying in like conjunction with what is known, you know.
But if you were to know all the other stuff, that maybe you would come to the conclusion of maybe not first degree murder, but second degree or manslaughter. If I'm being honest,
if I heard that he had already killed his dad, I probably would have to go with guilty. I just think that that's just too convenient, but I don't feel like 100% on that either, though.
Right. I mean, I think that when you get down to the jury instructions and the requirements of what you have to find in each of them, I don't know. I mean, I think
that's true.
I am realizing that, I mean, okay, let's say I heard about this case beforehand, and then I was listening to the trial, knowing all of this other stuff. I'm sure I would be thinking, like, oh my gosh, they don't even know. They don't know that he killed his dad in this way, and maybe they're going to find him not guilty, which is exactly what happened. And I can see why the public is saying, no, they got it wrong. You know, like, clearly he did it. But then I also realize that's evidence that that type of knowledge is prejudicial, and that you can't simply look at the facts of the case if you're influenced by something else. And I'm like, you know, I can't decide if maybe there are times that it's appropriate to be influenced by past patterns of behavior, right? Like, I think that can be important, and I think it would have changed the outcome in this case.
In regards to actually, no, I think you're right. I think the evidence has to be there. But in regards to, like, your opinion, if he actually did it or not, versus your opinion of can he be charged or whatever.
Right.
I mean, maybe those can be different things. And like, oh, I don't know. He probably
Right.
did do it. There's just not enough evidence to
Right.
to support it. But, I mean, I don't know. His fight or flight may be conditioned differently. I don't know. But I would have to be in real danger to get to a point of killing anybody, especially my parents. But thank goodness I don't have that experience or I really can't relate at all to it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think there is a difference. People can say like innocent by law or innocent by fact. Like, do you believe they didn't do it? Or do you just feel like legally you have to find not guilty? And I think that this could be one of those cases where you may not necessarily be sure of his innocence in fact, but you can't meet the threshold to find him guilty based on the evidence presented.
it's hard to say. If they waited to gather more evidence and do more of an investigation, could more have come of it? I don't know. The circumstances of the death just feels like there isn't really much more they could do or find.
Right.
So with the information presented, I mean, there's nothing that was like really that smoking gun. And
Yeah.
I don't know, but
Besides,
we'll
it
just have to see what he does in the future.
Yeah.
And
Right. Let's hope that worst case scenario for him is he had a terrible childhood, tumultuous, unpredictable parents that did crazy things, and he reacted in ways that were, in his mind, self-defense that resulted in the death of his parents, and now they're out of his life. He can
That's
move
it.
forward and be healthy, a good contributor to society, and move on with his life. But I do think it's like, well, really what we're afraid of is he actually a psychopath? Does he actually revel in this killing, and is he going to do it again? Especially if you say, oh, I got away with it twice, I can do it again, and I'm going to keep getting off. You know, if he really is a psychopath, you know, we could see more instances.
yeah. Well, the last thing that I have is just kind of interesting. As I was looking for kind of records and stuff, especially in Florida having the Sunshine Law, I was going through the Polk County records and searched up his name. And at first I used first, last, and middle name. And so nothing came up for this actual trial, but something else came up.
Oh.
And it's for sure the same person, same birth date, stuff like that. This happened March of 2025. So like a
Okay,
month or so after the trial.
Okay.
It's not. He was pulled over for speeding. But he was given multiple tickets. He was going 86 and a 65. He was also given a ticket for following too closely, improper distance when overtaking bicycles, and not having proof of insurance, and failure to display registration. All of those things. And the total fees were $835 for
Wow.
tickets on that. So
Okay,
it
that's
has
interesting.
nothing to do with whether he intended to kill his mother or not, but I was just like, oh, that's random. And
Well-
more than just like, oh, you were speeding, there's something more to that story, because
Well, yeah. Or I do wonder too if sometimes law enforcement, they know who he is. Like
Yeah.
they pull him over, they see who it is, they get his
punish
driver's
him.
license. Yeah, I mean it's possible, and I'm not saying that that's the most likely scenario, but you have to consider that they could be saying, I want to throw the book at him. What's everything that I could possibly come up
Totally
with
true.
to charge him with because he got off on something so big. But then there's also like, well, if he really was driving aggressively, you know, doing these types of things, well, that could indicate that they're not really thinking about other people and what might happen to them and being careless as a result.
yeah, no, 100%.
Interesting.
And then later I took out the middle name and it was just the first and last, and then it had those things and that whole case.
Did you see things that were related to the prior instances? Or?
I've gotten like an affidavit, and basically the affidavit says, I have it in here, it says the affiant has probable cause to believe the defendant committed the following: count 1, first-degree murder, a felony, which occurred in Lincoln County, Oklahoma on February 14th. Your affiant is a special agent with the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation assigned to the Investigative Division. On February 14th, 2023, Sheriff Charlie Dougherty of Lincoln County Sheriff's Office in Lincoln County, Oklahoma, requested full OSBI investigative assistance on a homicide that occurred at this address. On February 14th at approximately 1300 hours, Lincoln County Dispatch received a 911 call from the above-mentioned defendant reporting that he had shot his father, Charles Robert Griffith. The defendant stated there had been an argument and Charles had pulled a knife on him and chased him through the house. The defendant stated he had been cornered in the bedroom by his father where he picked up a gun and shot Charles twice. While investigating the crime scene, there were inconsistencies with the evidence on the scene and the story initially given to dispatch by the defendant. Your affiant went to the sheriff department to interview the defendant on the discrepancies at the scene. At the time, the defendant invoked his Fifth Amendment right to counsel. Charles was shot once in the chest and once in the head. He was pronounced dead on February 14th. Based on this affidavit and any attachments thereto, your affiant prays that this honorable court issues a finding that there is a probable cause for arrest. So his arrest warrant.
So that was the arrest warrant in Oklahoma.
Mm-hmm. Yep, arrest warrant in Oklahoma.
Yeah, I mean, sounds like there might be more evidence to work with than the other case, even though they haven't charged, right? But I do think the reason they probably charged in this case is because they knew about the other case. I mean, clearly they said as much in court because they found that text message regarding that case and him admitting something that he had done it intentionally or whatever.
And it's hard to say. I mean, did he actually admit that? Is that somewhere? Like, is that just made up?
But where, I mean, you would think, well, they did say at this very moment, they're still getting stuff from her phone. Like when the detective was testifying in court. So we know that there's still stuff being looked at and downloaded. So if there really is something there that pertains to the dad's case, maybe we'll see charges actually brought.
I hope that whatever was supposed to happen happened as far as like his trial and the outcome of it. You know, I hope that some good comes of it. There's nothing that can be done about it at this point, unless something really significant comes to light, right? Because I think that's one of the only ways they could get a new trial for it.
I don't think you
they can't at all.
No. It has to be a different,
it's so interesting because they can give you a retrial if you're guilty if new evidence comes to light. Right. They can't give you one if you're...
I know. That's why it's crazy that they move forward as quickly as they did. Why, if they don't have everything, why are they proceeding? She has said in a text that she got these recordings and whatever. Why aren't they saying,
trying to find those?
Let's wait. Let's find that. Unless they just decided, yeah, she was a whack job. She said things that weren't true. We don't think she actually had them, you know? But it's like, well, why wouldn't you give yourself more time to see if those things really were out there and really build your case? Because you know you only have one shot at it. So if they were so determined that he was guilty and that he needed to be behind bars, they should have taken their time.
100%. And that's kind of the thing is like, if it had ended in a hung jury instead of like, I don't know, because that is the responsibility on the jury as well, because it's
like with Casey Anthony. We're like, why did you go and say, well, okay, I don't agree with that, but I'll just do whatever you want. No.
Right.
No. If you're not convinced, then you should stand your ground and you should let it be a hung jury and let it be retried. That's my opinion on it, is that was a mistake on the part of the juror. If they were not truly convinced, they should not have changed their stance. I understand the pressure, though. Well, I don't really understand because I haven't been in that situation, but I can imagine the pressure that they feel to come to a consensus. But I mean, the whole reason we have 12 people is that it should be
unanimous.
Yeah, it should be hard and people should be convinced one way or the other. And if you're not, then the defense or the state didn't do their job, and then it should be retried.
Definitely, I agree with you. That's the reason why there are that many people that have to be convinced beyond a reasonable doubt. I mean, this isn't a majority rule situation. If it was, then you wouldn't have to change your mind. If it was, well, 11 of you believe it, so whatever, it's on your hands, and I guess I'll just go with that. Well, no, it's unanimous. So if you let a guilty person go free, they're free forever.
If you really aren't strongly convinced one way or the other, then it really should be a hung jury.
Yeah. Hang the jury.
That's right. It's okay. It's okay to be hung. It's all right. And actually should be the way that it goes if there's that question.
Uncertainty.
Yeah, for sure. So
Yeah, well, thanks for listening to my rant. I don't mean to convey that I think that it should have gone differently than it did. This is one of the cases that we've done that I feel conflicted every time I think about it.
Yeah.
I honestly do think like, oh, I don't know. I don't think there was enough evidence, but at the same time, it
It's
just
hard.
doesn't feel good to think that maybe a guilty person is free and there's no justice.
Right.
And there can no longer be
Yeah.
if they are guilty.
That's the problem with picking cases that aren't cut and dry.
Why couldn't we do a normal true crime podcast?
That's right. It's like, oh, we want to know, like, yep, justice was served. We know for sure that this was the...
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, all these ones that I listen to that I'm like, oh, isn't that horrible? But also very cut and dry and obvious.
Yeah. Yeah.
No question.
All right, guys. Well, thanks for listening. Hope you found that case interesting, and maybe it gave you a little bit different perspective on Colin Griffith and the whole trial process, and hope you join us for our next case. Until then, I'm Christy,
I'm Maryn.
and court is adjourned.